One of the things that fascinates me most about music is how it impacts the brain and how we feel certain emotions when playing and listening to music. There are a lot of reasons why music has such an impact based on our biology and our history. And in this last week, a YouTube channel called Big Think did an episode on how music has such power over the brain. So let's get into it.
4.4 million years ago, an Australopithecine called Ardi stood on her legs and walked. And ever since then, the rhythm of walking has stamped human music. But much more than that, pun intended, that the first steps put us on the path to forging links between the brain and muscular exertion and sound.
Now this is interesting because dance has obviously played such a massive role in our species in terms of identifying tribes and things like that. And I actually think you can see this a lot now if you think about the idea of the nightclub. That is basically the modern form of dancing to form bonds. It's obviously just to Ariana Grande rather than footsteps.
Hominins learn to hear footsteps as a pattern, and what patterns give you is a sense of time. You can predict what will happen next. The condition of being human, being midway between the birds in the heavens and the whales in the ocean, we can situate ourselves. Birdsong is as jerky as the motions of a bird, just as whales have a much more fluid rhythm of floating through their own medium. Human music reflects walking.
It's easy to forget that a lot of other species have their own version of dancing or music in the way that like birds sing or show their feathers in mating rituals. It's hardly surprising that we have developed some sort of music intuition based on what nature is doing, but it is fascinating that it's got to where it is now, where we've developed music so much and it still has such an emotional impact.
But we imagine that one note moves to the other, and most of music, be it a symphony or a song, unfolds a journey. And this journey takes us from one point to another in our minds. It's an imaginary journey, a very long-distance echo from the journey of our ancestors out of Africa.
So I think most music, and actually most drama, films, things like that, are all forms of storytelling. And as humans, I think we have developed a need to storytell as a way of understanding the world that's around us. And I think in the way that traditional storytelling, by just telling a story, gives you information, music tells you a story through the form of feeling or feeling a set of emotions that take you on that path rather than just explicitly telling you what's happening in the story.
What makes human music so distinctive is our link between sound and motion, which is due to the connections in the human brain between the motor regions controlling our motion and the regions controlling hearing and sound, the auditory cortex. As a rule, the deeper you dive into the human brain, the more universal one's propensity for music and for emotion goes. If you start with the brainstem, our oldest layer, brainstems flinch to reflexes in sound, so shocks and loud bangs will trigger the brainstem reflex. The next layer up, the basal ganglia, responds to pleasure, whether a sound is pleasant or unpleasant.
The question is, what makes a sound pleasant or unpleasant? And also, why are there so many variants, with some people liking one type of music and other people hating that same type of music? And how does that change over the course of our life? Because when you're younger, you like one certain type of music, let's say pop music, but as you get older, for the most part, your want to listen to current popular music is less so. You stick to the genre that you've always known.
Is where emotions happen: sadness, happiness, anger, fear. And the most modern layer, the neocortex, is the point where you process patterns and the complexities of music. In terms of our music instinct, one of our faculties, which are inborn, is what has been called auditory scene analysis, or the cocktail party effect. If you go to a party and you're surrounded by people jabbering away in different simultaneous conversations, you have an astonishing capacity to tune in to a particular thread. It's the same faculty you have when you're listening to a line in a Bach fugue.
That's interesting. So with fugues, a fugue is essentially where you have one melodic idea and then that melodic idea layers over the top of itself but slightly offset. So if you've got a 4-part harmony, you've got the same melody repeating 4 times but it's slightly offset, so they're starting at different places. And he's talking about your ability to tune into each one of those individual melodies at a time rather than just hearing one jumbled mess of music.
Birds also have that. Infant and a father emperor penguin surrounded by 40,000 breeding pairs can hear each other's voice in this incredible hubbub. Appreciating music purely as a form of relaxation or entertainment does a massive disservice to all the things that music helps you with. The biggest draw to mental health is loneliness. Music can bring people together. You don't have to actively make music with somebody else. Just to listen to music plugs you into a social network, because every note of music is social.
Yeah, this is really interesting because there are so many applications for music. Yes, you have it as recreational sort of listening. And if you're a musician, you obviously use it to play as well. But then you think about like music in a film context and how that amplifies emotions in that context. And then there's music used as music therapy to help people with certain conditions.
Music lowers stress by reducing cortisol. It gives you pleasure, makes you happy by flooding the brain with neurotransmitters like dopamine. Music is an excellent way of tagging memories, remembering the past. Expressing your deepest emotions and your identity, which can't be captured by language, because music is far too precise for words.
This kind of leads back to what I was saying, where when you tell a story with words, you're getting the information and that provides the emotion. But when you're listening to music, you have no choice but to just confront the raw emotion of what's being played, in the way that you perceive it anyway.
All these things increase your mental health, and ultimately, music becomes a mode of mindfulness, of contemplation. It's not purely relaxing because there's too much going on when you're listening. And the word relaxation gives a sense of passivity, whereas to listen is a very active and creative activity. We also love to imitate rhythm, and that's due to the existence of mirror neurons in our brains. When the brain sees an action, you don't have to move to experience that motion in your brain because the mirror neurons are responding sympathetically. We've always had an instinctive faculty to imitate. We call it mimesis. Yawns are contagious. If I see you yawning, I yawn back. But also emotions are contagious.
I think that probably comes from an instinct to survive and be part of a tribe where you need sympathy and empathy in order to survive. So I imagine if a piece of music is created with a desired effect, that's probably why, as a listener, you can sympathise and empathise with the certain feeling that's been created.
Emotion isn't just feeling. Darwin was the first to observe that emotion had an adaptive role in the field. That animals and people, they experience emotions in relation to goals, which help them survive. So happiness is when you achieve a goal, anger is when the goal is blocked, sadness is when you lose a loved one, fear is the most archetypal emotion. When you're exposed to a threat, you have an instinctive response to either freeze or to fight or to flee. Music is full of similar responses. There's an extreme reaction to music which has been called the chills or frisson or the sublime. There are moments in music which are so intense, and they're often triggered by breakthrough moments of loudness or extremity. You have the same parts of the brain which respond to that as response to fear, which is why the chills give you goosebumps or piloerection. The hairs on your skin literally stand on end. But you enjoy this fear. And this is very strange.
I wonder whether that goes back to that whole tribal thing, and hearing a certain type of music associates you with your tribe or someone else's tribe. And if you hear certain kinds of music, does that make your biology fear someone else's tribe or something like that?
Similar experience when we go on a fairground ride or when we're watching a volcanic eruption in the safety of an observation platform. It's almost as if music is violence without the danger. Nobody dies in music. Is why we think that music is able to express emotion in a very visceral way. So when you're listening to music, it's a kind of mental time travel. When you're absorbed in a work, you're traveling back through layer upon layer of your brain, almost biologically, which is why I call music a sort of umbilical cord back to Mother Nature.
I think this is the strongest argument for people who think that pop music is simplistic and classical music is more of an interesting way of listening to music. And that's because with classical music, you get a fully developed, long-form thought out narrative using emotions, and pop music tends to just have one emotion and one function within that song. That's not to say that there isn't a time and place for both, but it is an interesting conversation. If you are more curious about the effects that music can actually have on your brain, then check out this video where I went through a load of information about the effects that music has on your brain. So head on through and I will see you there.